live. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. If we could just move forward. We are very pleased today to be joined by an incredible group of panelists here. I am Greg Kahn. I'm the CEO of the Internet of Things Consortium. It's a group of about 75 companies in the IoT space, in connected homes, wearables, retail transformation, autonomous vehicles, and smart cities. And very happy and pleased to be joined by an esteemed group of panelists, including Alan Bohm from my left at Procter & Gamble, which is one of Internet of Things Consortium's members. I know that your CES schedules are packed, and so thank you very much for joining us this afternoon here today. In this session, entitled The Connected Home Through the Eyes of Consumers, we're going to examine a day in the life of a consumer as she navigates the fast-evolving home. We'll explore the way that living environments are evolving and what consumers can expect from companies in this ever-changing industry. While we won't have the opportunity in this session to discuss privacy elements, that's certainly an area that warrants specific attention in 2020. There's going to be a very important trade-off between privacy and convenience. For those of you that would like to see it on live stream, we are at pglifelab.com. And without further ado, we're going to dive in. So I'm going to ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves in about 30 seconds. If you could share your role, your company, and your perspective on the connected home.
Great. Hello, everybody. I'm Alan Bohm. I'm the CTO for Procter & Gamble. So thank you very much for joining us here at the Life Lab. In my role, I'm responsible for the technology, for the connectivity for many of the devices that you see here in our platforms. We certainly believe that through the use of artificial intelligence, through the use of coming 5G networking and others, we're going to see more and more connections in our life that create experiences that we bring from our home to our offices and to our neighborhoods and society. So it's a very exciting time to be in this area, and look forward to sharing some thoughts with my panelists, my co-panelists here.
Thanks, Alan.
Hi, my name is Joanna Pena-Bickley, and I am the head of design and research for Alexa devices. I think we're at this really interesting intersection in time right now as we look across the floor and we see so many different things that provide connectivity. One of the things that I'm often struck by is whether or not those are enchanting or make magic for customers. And so much of the work that we do today is really focused on creating those enchanting moments in time for our customers.
Hi, I'm Chris Jones. I'm CTO for iRobot Corporation. We make practical robots for the home, probably best known for the Roomba robotic vacuum. And over the past number of years, we've really been focusing on making those robots smarter, allowing them to better understand the context of the home and how to better personalize their performance to do the best job in any individual consumer's home. And part of that focus more recently is about how those products work with the broader smart home, how they can integrate with other devices in the home to provide even better, offer better control for the consumer, better personalization, so that robot fits better into the nature of their own home.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Linda Bernardi. I'm Senior Advisor at McKinsey. My focus is the confluence of AI, IoT, 5G, quantum. How are these things going to work together? What is the future hyper-connected world going to look like? My second book discusses that, and I'm really excited being here today because we have a broad spectrum of thoughts to really share about what is the future true IoT, intelligent IoT, and brainstorm with all of you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matthew Davis. I'm the head of creative for Warner Media, and specifically the Warner Media Innovation Lab in New York. And I suppose I'm here to talk about kind of the role of futurism and storytelling and how we consume content and its relationship to frontier technology.
Well, thank you, an incredible group of panelists here. So let's dive in. I'm going to start with a few interesting statistics around the connected home. We're here at CES, the first major tech event of 2020, the new decade. This is from the CTA, just to underscore the level of growth and disruption that's taking place in the industry. So, overall consumer technology sales are expected to record $422 billion in revenue in 2020, and nearly 4% growth, and that's driven by the popularity of streaming services, wireless earbuds, 5G connectivity, and AI-enabled devices. Smartphones, 166 million units are expected to ship in 2020, which is up 2%. 20 million 5G smartphones are projected to sell this year for revenue of 15.3 billion. Smart home sales, including smart door locks, bells, cameras, thermostats, smoke detectors, are expected to reach 35.2 million units, which is a 15% growth year over year, with revenue of 4.3 billion. Smart speakers unit sales are projected at 39 million, which is up 5%, for revenue of 4.2 billion. That's up 14%. So you can see that this is an industry that is really booming. If we were to have this conversation about 10 years ago talking about the connected home, it would be a very different group of individuals and companies that were on the stage, but today it affects everybody. So we're going to start to my left here with Alan and our host in Procter & Gamble. P&G's approach has always been to combine deep consumer insights with science. And this year marks Procter & Gamble's second major presence at CES. In our calls leading up to this event, you mentioned the lines between physical products and digital files are becoming blurred faster than ever before. And in today's booth, you're sharing several products that are on the market and others that are in concept phase. And I'm going to just name a couple. One that's my favorite, the Rollbot, R-O-L-L-B-O-T. It's a first of its kind robot that when activated with a smartphone delivers a fresh roll of Charmin to you. Everybody needs a robot to deliver their Charmin to you. People won't have to be left in that oh so familiar bind of an empty toilet paper roll with no help in sight. And the second is Smell Sense, which is an electronic sensor monitoring system that lets you plan ahead and check how the bathroom smells without having to experience it yourself. Very important, not just at CES, but in the home. So Alan, I want to ask you, how does Procter & Gamble, a trusted brand with so much history and such a well-established customer base, use this information to create new consumer products?
Well, we've been involved in consumer insights for years. It starts many years ago with traditional ways of collecting data, and what we have now is we certainly embrace privacy. We follow that 100%, whether it be the PII, the GDPR coming out in Europe, the California laws. So we're very, very comfortable and very, very cautious with what we do collect. But at the end of the day, the information that we use, that we do get from our research, is used to enhance our products. It's used to enhance our consumer experience. It's used to be able to provide new insights to you, such as our skin analyzer products. We're using artificial intelligence technology through our SK2 and our Olay Skin Advisor products, so that we can tell you different things about yourself, how you can enhance your beauty, enhance your skin tone, and other things like that. This is just common practice now, as we see walking around the floor. We've been on the leading edge of this for a number of years, and we continue to advance where we're going.
Chris, I'm going to kick it to you next. We keep talking about the fact that the robots are taking over everything. So iRobot is bringing robots into consumers' homes, but in a very useful way, or helping them keep their physical spaces spotless. And through voice commands, a homeowner can now say, clean the kitchen. So there's a lot of discussion at CES about the role of robots in society. Can you share how everyday consumers are working hand in hand with robots and what we should expect going forward?
Sure. So as you said, the way our products operate, they operate in the home. They provide a useful service for the consumer in their home, helping them keep their floors cleaned, here in the near future, helping them keep their lawns mowed. It's providing them a service that frees them and their time up to do other more valuable things in their life. And you mentioned one of the great ones, Amazon Alexa. The ability to say, Alexa, ask Roomba to clean the kitchen is now possible through the voice interfaces and Alexa devices, through the AI running on the edge on our robots in the home, allows those robots to respond to those types of commands, come off the dock, do a beeline to the kitchen, systematically clean the kitchen, go back to the dock, evacuate the dustbin, and be ready to go for the next run. That's available today. Really is a time saver. If you're in the kitchen, you just made a mess, to be able to say, Alexa, clean the kitchen, and have that really happen is a key to what we're trying to do, to reduce that friction to keeping the home clean. Looking forward, as I mentioned a minute ago, is enabling other ways for that consumer to trigger or control how that robot operates in their home. You can set a schedule today a time-based schedule. That works for some people. Some people's lives are a little more chaotic, a little more dynamic. Maybe you're a few minutes late getting out of the house with the kids one day. You know, the last thing you might want is a robot under your feet as you're trying to get out the door, which is why we're working to integrate with other products in the home so you can find ways to use your other smart home devices to intelligently trigger a robot at the right time. So instead of at 8 a.m. on the dot, you know, when the garage door closes around 8 a.m. in the morning on a weekday, that's when I want the robot to go, because that means I've just left and it's time to go. And it's through capabilities like that we're really pressing forward to try to reduce that friction, allow the robots to fit as seamlessly as possible and in as custom way as possible into an individual consumer's dynamic household. So that's where I see that going in the years ahead.
Thanks, Chris. Well, my daughter's name is Alexa, so when we say Alexa, clean the kitchen in our home, we have to be very careful about, has a slightly different meaning in our household. But I want to, speaking of Alexa, Joanna, I want to ask you a question. So the home is becoming much more digital and multimodal, and many companies like Amazon that you represent have created platforms to meet this trend head on with technology that removes friction from every stage of living. In our conversation before CES, we discussed this interesting tension between the connected human and the connected home. So do you believe that consumers prefer interfaces that are tethered to a home, like a smart television, or those that can move with her on the go, such as wearables or hearables? Where do you think speakers fit into this as well?
Sure. I think one of the things that we think is that I don't know that it's an either-or situation. I think what we hear from customers is all about the need and desire to be independent, whether that is in their, while they're in their home or they're on the go. Just because you're in home doesn't necessarily mean you don't need an on-the-go product. Today, I actually happen to be wearing our lovely Echo Buds, right? One of the things that allows me to do is not be tethered to a screen, right? The more and more that I think that we hear from our customers, the thing that we hear loudest and clearest is, how do I detach myself a little bit from that phone? And I think one of the things that we're really working towards in devices is actually making sure that there's interoperability between the speaker, right between the things that I have in my ears, like an Echo Bud product, or even our multimodal experiences. Each one of them will serve a purpose inside the home, but I think the dynamic is to be creating devices that augment the human ability and that take that human ability to make the human smarter, right? It's not there to replace the human, but to augment and give them superpowers. I like to think of these as being able to cancel out the noise walking in CES, but it also does a really good job of the kids arguing, to say the least, and get back to work. So whether that is I am in a working from home situation, having devices that augment and understand and augment my intelligence along those ways, being able to check my schedule, all the way to some of the great use cases around fitness, where we're seeing more and more of that extend from home to work. And everything in between. So, I look at it, and what we hear is the pain points that we're trying to solve are often not just relegated to the home, but it's actually keeping people independent in their homes, no matter what age they're at or what situation we're trying to solve for.
Thank you. Linda, you're one of the world's leaders in digital transformation and have been an operator as well. Let's talk about that interoperability word and as it relates to consumers. In many homes, consumers are saying that they have 50 to 100 things that talk and connect, but they don't interconnect. Most consumers don't understand that word, interoperability. They just want devices to work together. Do you think that consumers are looking for individual products that are intelligent, or are they looking for connected systems? And will the average consumer ever understand what a smart home is?
That's a great question. So as consumers, all of us have faced this. We got Echo in our homes with Alexa. We loved it. Then you have Google, and you're walking around talking to Google. You're talking to Xfinity. You're talking to Siri. You're talking to Bixby on your Samsung. You're talking to Cortana. You're talking constantly to individual devices. Then when you leave your home, you're expecting your mobile to carry your experience into the car. and now you're talking in your car. So there are a couple of things in there. One is that right now, we as consumers love the individual capability in each of the devices, but we aren't really thinking about how these devices, and by the way, included in those devices are iRobot, ADT, Ring, your oven, your refrigerator, and thousands eventually, your sensors. Every device that you have is going to talk about it. So initially as consumers, we love the functionality, what it delivers to us, but there are issues of interoperability, security, privacy that we haven't really thought about. And so to answer your question, no, we're not at that point yet, because number one, there isn't a service that truly interoperates. That ecosystem does not exist. And secondly, from the consumer perspective, right now, there isn't a real advantage. When actually I can talk to Alexa and I go to iRobot, I will see that advantage, because now these two things are linked. There's another consideration that we have to bring into this, which is really AI. The question is the consumer going to be the one responsible for interoperability? Or are devices going to know which other devices to recruit to complete a task? And that's really bringing intelligence to the edge that we've got to think about. So we're on our way, but step one in adoption is the first step, and then we get there.
We say at the IoTC that we're at the top of the second inning in a long game that's likely to go extra innings of IoT. Thank you for that perspective, Linda. Matthew, I want to talk about content and connected screens as we relate to consumers, and we're seeing tons of screens around the halls and floors of CES, and they're expanding their footprint all over the home and outside of the home. There's a lot of data that's being generated by all of these screens about individual users, which could be used in turn to create better content, more personalized content, and a better, some would say, overall brand experience. How do you see the future of leveraging big data to create personalized and more human experiences for the consumer?
Yeah, I think there's a way in which the data we collect sort of underserves a larger imagination for how our relationship to media. So for instance, if you collect a bunch of data and you write a bunch of algorithms, what you basically get is a recommender. And it's a bunch of lists in your life. It's B plus playlist, it's movies, it's television shows, it's music. And everyone's sort of stopped at the sort of Flintstones and pre-Jetsons version of what a recommender is. And in my mind, if you look at the way people consume content, or how fandom is formed, or the way people, if they do a Game of Thrones watch party, or if they go to the same pub every week to watch an NBA basketball game, we like the idea of using data to really improve the way that people live their lives at beyond the functional, but at a more emotional and social level. And I think that's sort of a frontier in my mind for how we use data, not just to make better ad targets per se, or to put people in front of screens more often or all the time, but with greater purpose and with better outcomes for human beings.
Okay, thank you. All right, I want to, you teased the Jetsons, so we're going to go on that theme. We had a really fun conversation with the six of us last week, which is this connected home evokes images of the Jetsons, or some would say Minority Report, right? Here's a question, and I'm going to start with Linda here. Can science fiction play a role in the connected home?
Absolutely. I look back to Star Trek, 40 years ago, and the pad and the lapel, and the things that we watched 40 years ago inspired us. I think we get frightened a little bit because there are negative aspects of sci-fi, AI being one of it, right? AI has gotten a really bad spin because everything in AI, it's about, the Terminator and things taking over the world and machines destroying humans. But I think if we go beyond that, definitely there's a lot of inspiration.
Alan?
Now, I think sci-fi and the imagination that comes out of Hollywood and elsewhere is an incredible inspiration. I'm not sure if anyone went to the Mercedes-Benz keynote last night, but they've teamed up with Avatar, and they created an entirely new concept car that lives, it breathes, it's part of the biosphere, it merges human capability and with machine. And I think this is inspiration for the home for us. I think we're all very conscious about what we need to do to protect our environment, about sustainability, and I believe the connectivity, and we put this all together, is going to create all kinds of new products and services that none of us have ever thought of before.
Joanna?
Yeah, one of the things that we do at Amazon is we write narratives to begin our creation process. And so much of it is, we talk about things that are 30 years ago, but I would be remiss to say that there are things today and really wonderful narratives being drawn out. One of my favorites happens to be 12 Tomorrows, which is released every single year by MIT grads. That envision a future and tell stories. I think the importance is that we understand, those of us in the place of invention are often, we look to fiction for inspiration to that invention. And I think we've seen that throughout human history. I think that's more true today than it has ever been. And I think we're seeing it as we walk the floor. While the Jetsons is, I think, a lovely tip of the hat of something that was close to 50 years ago. What's really interesting to me is what customers actually expect out of it and what they expect out of our brands. And so when we combine that narrative with those customer expectations, 100 years that we've been filling their heads with flying cars and jetpacks, the question to us as inventors and as designers is, how do we collectively begin to create those experiences for a better, less utopian world, but actually one that solves the human problems of today.
Matthew.
Yeah, at Warner Media, where we have this idea of, a bunch of multiverses, whether that's Rick and Morty or Westworld or Watchmen or Game of Thrones, or use your imagination. And I think whenever you're projecting into the possible future, you're kind of either promoting a utopia or promoting a dystopia. And I think when people really richly engage in things that are fantastical or future leaning, we build consciously or unconsciously all the paradigms that we carry around, whether you expect a robot to be biomimetic or human-like or anthropomorphic, or whether it expects to dismiss itself or become invisible. I think we all indirectly draw from science fiction and from fantasy to create all these tropes. So I think that puts a responsibility on creators, whether what you create is media and information or what you create is robots.
And Chris, you work on robots all day long. What's your
There's a lot of robots.
A lot of robots.
Yeah. As I said at the beginning, iRobot, we're about building practical robots for the home. So that's about what is the job that we're looking to do, that the consumer's looking for the robot to do. It may not be the most, visually appealing, wide-ranging robot that's operating in the home, but in finding the niche or the application area where you can build a product that embodies or that uses robotics technologies to deliver a real value to that consumer. And, iRobot's been around this is our 30th year, and Roomba's been out since 2002. It's only really the Roombas that have been out over the past couple years that have finally kind of gotten to the point that these are now finally the product that I think the company has been envisioning for those decades. This is a product that sits on the dock. It runs when you want it to run. It cleans where you want it to clean. It empties its own dustbin, and it's ready to go the next time. You can forget about doing that job for weeks at a time. And that only happens because of a focus on building the technology required to deliver that very magical experience. So, we may be inspired by a lot of robots in science fiction and all of that, but how do you translate that into a very practical application that consumers can value is the key.
Linda.
So one thing you mentioned, I think Alan mentioned Mercedes. If you get an opportunity to go to the auto section, it's nothing about cars anymore. What used to be about how cool a car looks, in fact, there are cars being displayed with glass exterior. It's all about the experience. It's about the intelligence. It's about the interaction. It's about the things that the car does that has nothing to do about the car. It's not how fast it goes 0 to 3 seconds, but it's about how it's connected, how it helps your life. So I think this year we're beginning to see that evolution where we really are evolving into more of that kind of an environment, and that's a really cool place to check out.
Alan, I want to ask you a question. There's a school of thought in the industry that the home itself will become the new operating system. Do you agree with that sentiment?
We spend so much time in our home that just by virtue of being there, it is already an operating system in a non-connected sense or in a purely physical sense. Now it's catching up with the connectivity, but what's really happening though is you're taking that with you wherever you go. You're taking it into your car. You're taking that into your work. You're taking that to your neighbors. That's going to be done through different interfaces, whether it be voice, whether it be through phones and text and other message formats that we haven't even thought of. But it itself is, you have to think about it, your home is your operating system today.
Joanna?
Absolutely. disagree with it, and I think I would expand and say that if we start to really help to realize that operating system by understanding that today we're really focused in on the area of devices, but one of the things that's really an exciting space that as you walk any one of these halls, you actually have manufacturers of products that actually help the home to become smart from the studs up. And so that's in a really exciting space. So the need for interconnectivity and different interfaces is actually incumbent upon, I think, the designers within those companies to really begin to provide unique value when it comes to things like home sustainability. And some of those really important human needs that we have around aging in place. As we have one of the largest aging populations on the planet, how do we get them to feel safety and independent in their own homes longer? And I'd say that also carries over into this idea that, as we start to take a look at these devices, that they will continue to be nomadic, right? They aren't necessarily going to be stationary, that they will have to have transference to the spaces that you end up living your life. And so you start to parse that out. But I think the real focus here is always to maintain that we're really designing for humans where they decide they're going to spend that time and in the spaces that they need, as opposed to thinking about the home as the ultimate operating system. I'd love for us to think about as the human as the ultimate operating system, and all of the skills that we can actually augment them with to be a smarter, more efficient, and happier individual on the go.
Joanna, I want to pick up on something that you said, and a question for Linda, which is thinking about the space. I mentioned at the beginning of this panel that if we were doing a connected home panel 10 years ago, it would be a very different representation of companies, and that has really morphed and evolved. But it's also required very complex partnerships that haven't existed before in this space. And now, Joanna, you bring up a point of it's going to move to your automobile, or it's going to move to your office environment or your retail environment. At IOTC, we often talk about that consumer journey, that he or she doesn't really think about the differentiation. She is just on the go, right? But it requires complex partnerships to make all of this sync and work together. So Linda, the question for you is that because partnerships are critical in terms of helping us evolve and helping this sort of science fiction notion come to life, is that it's going to require different types of companies to come together. We're entering into a new decade here, and so are there specific industries that you think are either represented on the stage here or elsewhere in the show that you think are going to play a bigger role as it relates to the smart home space this year?
So many that, I look at Amazon, and Amazon is hugely present in the auto section. It's awesome. There's so many that are going to play. But let me sort of bring a different twist to this question, which is there's another thing that has changed in our culture, and that's an expectation of personalization and value. We're no longer a society that likes running apps. We like running things that do things for us, that understand us. Represented by iRobot, understanding when do I leave? I want it to do things for me. So one of the things I'm beginning to think is the driver of what's going to build ecosystem is bringing partners together that satisfy needs that consumers have. There are going to be mega players for sure, but when you look at certain spaces, it's going to be what is going to fit my need more. So if you take home food delivery, it's not about just ordering, but what do I like? What are my tastes? Which players are going to come together to intertwine, I think is going to define what that interoperability is.
And if I could just build on top of that, yes, and I think one of the things it's lovely that we get to sit next to each other because we actually are in a great partnership. And I think this is a really great example of where when we create a phenomenal software solution like an Alexa, right, that we make it easy for manufacturers to constantly be updating their products and evolving and finding the use cases. We do not believe that we will do it alone. And we believe that this is going to be a really large ecosystem. Think about it for just a second. Everything will connect to everyone. So when you start to look at the emerging ecosystems, the partnerships that are emerging, we certainly have, whether it's iRobot, you take a look at the other manufacturers that are actually in our pavilion, and then our own Echo products. So much of this is answering the call of our customers. And so I think as we start to look at this, it's really going to be consumer demand that actually begins to help formulate these partnerships, where we have levels of expertise in very specific domain areas. Because I think that as we look at it, whether it is in health, whether it is connected home, in robotics, whether we're talking about mobility, or even aging in place, there are great manufacturers that are in that space. What they're trying to figure out and transform to is, what does it look like for the next 100 years, and how do we begin to solve our customers' problems? And so I think so many of the partnerships that are taking place has often been in response to our own customers. And I think we will continue to see that grow.
Thank you. Chris?
I would add on this, and in fact tie it back to the original question as a full loop. This is a great topic, by the way, in that we absolutely value partnership with folks like Alexa that allows us to build the right experience we want for our products in the home. As I said, to give the consumer the right level of kind of low friction control of the product within the context of their own home. And a broader framework perhaps around which we think about partnerships like that and how we work with other products in the home in very particular use cases, so curating different types of integrations, is actually back to your home as an operating system point. Maybe I'm a little biased, I don't know, but we actually think of a very particular type of operating system in the home. We actually think of the home, or the smart home specifically, as a robot. Because when we build robots, you're thinking about building a physical device that has to sense the real world. It has to think about that. What is it sensing? What's happening in this context right now? And then figure out how to act, how to physically do something to affect change in that world. That's the fundamental of building a robot. And the way we actually think about smart home is very similar. The smart home has a lot of sensors in the home. It can detect temperature or lighting levels, or if the door's open or not, et cetera. And it can act on that. It can turn lights on and off. It can open or close the garage door. And the piece that we're really excited about, that we think will unlock a lot more potential, is actually around how the home thinks about those devices. How are they positioned in the space? How do they reason about that, well, that sensor is here, it detected that. These are the devices in that context that I can trigger to act. So we think about the smart home as a robot in a very similar way to the way we build robots. And that's a way that we think about partnerships, which is, how do we piece these different sensors and actuators together, along with an understanding of the space of the home that robots actually are ideally suited to be able to build and maintain. And how do all those things get fit together into a common framework, or an OS, if you will?
I want to ask both Matthew and Alan, because I think of representing two tales of content on one end and also packaged goods on the other end, two industries that have done a phenomenal job with consumers of really building engagement. And so often at CES and elsewhere, we talk in tech speak as opposed to in human speak. And it's really interesting, Matthew, I think I want to talk about Warner Innovation Lab. Warner, of course, part of AT&T now, but what you're doing in terms of your IP and helping to sort of build partnerships to socialize the potential uses of this technology. How are you thinking about partnerships at CES as we're related to the connected home or the connected universe?
Yeah, again, when I imagine, because we can, for instance, watch all of our favorite shows and hang out with our friends and share our interests and kind of build our own collective individual media zeitgeist, I think there's just a lot of opportunities there in terms of contextualizing people with technology. So in other words, instead of maybe it's not as idealistic to imagine a bunch of people sitting in front of a television, I still think there's a way of humanizing or designing a more empathetic society by paying attention to how people interact with things. So in other words, an Alexa might make, it can be kind of it adopts itself in a single purpose way. It's a great timer, it's a great kitchen timer, but it also invites people to listen to music together at home. So it's simpler than a button to just make music happen, where you can gather around with your family and just listen to music out loud and talk and interact with each other and be surprised. And I think that's sort of, I think, at the lab, at least part of our approach is to include an amount of serendipity or whimsy and allow things to have fun a little bit without everything having to solve a problem all the time. And I think that's sort of the beginning. The home isn't just a place where we spend a lot of time, it's the intimacy there. So it's where our families are, our kids are, and our pets, where we can be our worst selves. And I think there's a lot of ways in which the things around us can just surprise us and make things more fun before it rushes to solve all of our human problems.
Surprise and delight. Alan, how do you think about
I
partnerships?
think last year was the first year that P&G had a significant presence at CES, and I think Mark Pritchard, our chief brand officer, said it best. He said, for us, this is the consumer experience show. It's not just about electronics. We're talking about experiences, whether they're physical, whether they're digital, the merger of these two, hybrid. And that's something that Procter & Gamble has been working on for years and years. Last year, you talked about partnerships. Our P&G Ventures area, which is back here this year, walked away with about 800 new partners last year, just from working together from young startups to more mature companies that found new ways for us to interact. We've started working with some of our customers and our distributors in ways that we have never done before in the areas of replenishment, the areas of providing new media content, working with our media providers. So the future is about working together. It is about cooperating across all boundaries. It's about interoperability, whether it's at the content level, at the technical level, and at the business level. And I think you're going to see more and more of this growing because it benefits all of us as consumers.
There's an interesting point that kind of came up when we're talking about consumers of this tension between ownership or usership. That a lot of consumers today are saying, I don't want to own a physical product or device. I'd rather just subscribe or become a member of a service. Where do you think as a group this is heading within the next 10 years? And anyone could jump in here.
Sure. I think one of the things, this was part, I think it's one of the richest conversations we're having which is, how do we begin to pay for all this innovation, right? And what is the sustainable business model as we move forward? And I think that we have some interesting generational shifts, and they are not, they're emerging at this time. I think I spent a tremendous amount of time in the area of mobility, and what we found with folks that were in the space is that they didn't necessarily thrive around the idea of ownership. They were already into a place of usership because we had already kind of pre-trained them into this idea around devices anyway, and they were just saying the vehicle as an extension or another device. The same is going to be done, and it's actually, we're starting to begin to see the outlines of it when it comes to connected homes, is how much of the American dream is going to be around ownership as opposed to usership. And there's this really interesting generational rub around when we think about having spaces in time, whether you're looking at Airbnb, right? You're starting to take a look at all of these different kinds of business models emerge from experimentation. So by no means is it either or proposition. I think we're starting to see the outlines of what customers are really wanting and how they want to pay for things. And how we're going to do that value exchange in the future, right? And so for us, as we start to look at the monetization of what we are about to design or what's already in the marketplace, what we're doing is listening to our customers and understanding that the underlying sometimes way that we want to pay for things isn't the old way that we want to pay for things. And so that value exchange may be incremental or in a subscription. But the fact of the matter is that in a world where customer experience is king, we need to start actually pulling our business models around that same strategy. And I think that is the interesting trajectory of many of the brands that we work with and partner today.
Linda, ownership or usership?
Well, whether it's ownership or usership, I think the bigger issue is data. Today, in the convenience of the experience, we're giving up a lot of data. Whether I own a car or share a car or whatever I do, who I am and what I do is data that's being shared. I'm hoping to extend the dialogue, Greg, to where we begin as a society to question that. We need to understand the trade-offs of convenience versus what we give up. Where is ultimately that data residing? What is that data being used for? And that's a much harder question we've got to address as well. So that's kind of where I would take that conversation.
I want to kind of take that thread when we talk about sort of these merging of trends, of which data sharing is one. We're in a service economy now, and we're also, we're just-in-time delivery and is becoming very, very commonplace. And so there's a very interesting transition happening now with Amazon and Walmart and others, where not only is there delivery to a home, but there's now delivery within a home, and in certain cases, there's delivery direct to the refrigerator, right? And I think we're in very, very early stages of this. And so, Alan, I want to start with you. Is this a trend that you think, it's very early stages in this, but this notion of the consumer, she is going to push a button or subscribe to a service, and the eggs are going to be in their refrigerator without any concerns or any theft. Do you think that this is going to hit the mainstream, or are we sort of at a point where consumers might start pushing back a little bit?
And I think first off, we can't have a U.S. view of all of this stuff. I mean, different parts of the world are going to evolve at different paces. Some places are going to evolve much faster than what's going on in the United States, and some are going to evolve slower. But when you start talking, this is about choice at the end of the day. You know, we were talking about the different call it lease the service versus buy the service. Opti over here, you can actually buy the product, or you can pay a monthly subscription for the product. We have a service, many people have gone to university and lived in the dorms. I'm sure many people here have done that. Now we not only have meal plans, which is the universities, you have laundry plans. Again, it's a service provided by P&G that the students can do. So I think it gets down to pure choice. You have to be flexible enough, have enough different business models, which we have been working on, to be able to solve any need in any part of the world. And again, I caution us not to look through a U.S. lens on this, because there are parts of the world that are much further ahead than the United States in the use of connected home and connected home technologies.
I would agree with that. I would say that we take it, if you just take a lens and look at what's going on in Berlin, which has some of the stricter privacy laws that are on the books today, or even some of the really great inventions that are happening at the heart of some of the, in Japan, in Tokyo, in Kyoto, some of the places where they're a good 25 years ahead of us, because they decided they were going to invest in their infrastructures to have things like connected cities and get to a place of ensuring their mobility of their aging populations. You know, one of the things that I think it's really important to do is to look to them to inspiration, and then begin to understand that, you know, as we continue to innovate, there is no one answer to, you know, kind of a generalized society. That just doesn't necessarily exist. I think that we're going to continue to have segments of populations that are interested in purchasing, or really going further in understanding that the value exchange may not be something that is all reliant on their data, right? And I think it's about building our brand's trust in doing that, and ensuring that as we're building that trust and that exchange continues to happen, that, you know, those of us who believe we own the customer or have some type of ownership over the customer really value and keep their really their needs front and center at all times.
So, Chris, I want to ask, from your perspective, there are a lot of individuals that have cleaning services that come into their home, and again, this evolution is allowing some of them to come, you know, into their home without them being present. Obviously, iRobot has a different strategy, which is about, we have a device that does it for you, and you don't have to allow that individual into the home. What are your consumers telling you? Do you believe that they don't want those individuals in the home, and they much prefer to have a device that does the cleaning for them?
I don't know if I would go quite that far. I mean, I think we do a very particular job in terms of helping a home be kept clean on a very regular basis. There could be, and likely are, other services, right, needed to, whether the consumer provides them themselves or they outsource them to do other jobs in general as part of home maintenance. You know, in thinking about usership versus ownership, and maybe this gets to a little bit of this question as well, is another dimension of this might also be how things change over time in a household. It could be change that happens on a daily basis. So, you know, today we're on a regular schedule, but tomorrow the kids are home sick. And that means the way my devices in my home need to respond should be different. So that's not a usership or ownership question there, but if you extend that out to how a home changes over months or years, right, you can start to see as a newly married couple, and then kids are added, the types of things that they might want the devices in their home to be provided are going to change and evolve all the way through to assisting with independent living and so on. It's a different set of devices and use cases. So there may be a bit of a check mark or a plus next to the usership model in terms of allowing that household to evolve and change over time and have the devices evolve over time as well in the composition and in the way they work together to do different things for that household as the years move on.
I think if I could just build on that very quickly, I think one of the things that you just touched on and is so important as we think about it is also the accessibility of these things as we are designing them. As we really love to think that we're trying to design for 100% of humanity to stay in those connected spaces and do so. I think one of the things that you just touched on is important is that I think ultimately some of the goal is that these are getting smarter over time and evolving with our needs. And I think that's a super important factor in how we go to market, but I think even more importantly, how we're designing forward and reminding ourselves that today you may be, completely able-bodied, but tomorrow you may have a disability, whether that is a hearing ability, in aging in place, whether you begin to have low vision. And so some of the things that, we really look to is, something like our Echo Show, where you have the integration with an iRobot, or even being able in the Echo Show arena to be able to show accessibility with some of our other manufacturers. Today, if you show an Echo Show a Charmin, that will tell you it's a Charmin if you have low visibility, things like that. So I think it's really important that what we continuously kind of evolve and work towards is really trying to solve those really specific problems that we all become expert at.
I want to ask Matthew a question here, because I think what we're saying is that change is constant. There's always going to be change in the industry, and it's very challenging for us as an industry to keep up with the change and to communicate the benefits to consumers. The use cases in the smart home are still very raw. I mean, we're still experimenting a lot. Consumers are just getting used to all these devices. The question is how, as an industry, can we do a better job of taking consumers across that journey, mixed households and generational shifts, and what role will content and storytelling play in communicating these changes that take place? We know that CES is a very small slice of the population. We like to think that everybody at CES is a representative of the population in the US. Hate to say it, guys, it isn't. So how can we do a better job as an industry of using storytelling to explain these changes that are happening in the home?
Sure, you talked about this sort of progress, which I believe we have a tendency to falsely perceive as being both a straight line and being incremental, sort of thinking, oh, when are people going to be more comfortable giving over their smart locks to a delivery agent or something? In my mind, I don't really see a step function. I think of radical transformations that are going to happen in the adoption of these kinds of technologies that will either be because of just paradigm shifts in human culture or age, or because of things out of our control like human density, people living in denser cities, things that are going to be put upon us to change in order to literally survive and adapt and not kill each other. And so I think ultimately, and if you look at the role that I think the storytelling or that imagination plays, again, I always kind of signal to some kind of optimism, right? Not that I'm not entertained by a Black Mirror-esque sort of version for all things human-machine interaction, but I think there's just, if you look in China, for instance, which is often controversialized for its approach to data and IoT and privacy, I think at the same time, they're at least a society that's having a conversation about what you can use with this data. Can you make more efficient cities? Can you use energy more efficiently? Can you make it easier for somebody to get to their home, to their work? Can you see a camera in a store and smile to pay for some fried chicken? It's not always as nefarious. It's a bigger social conversation and societal conversation that involves private institutions and the public trust. And I'm not saying it doesn't have some drawbacks or some real challenges in terms of how you would idealize a society, but at least the conversation is happening, and I think we need to have a similar conversation.
So I want to take that thread because you mentioned China, and some really interesting paradigms are playing out now in China, particularly with relation to traffic, where individuals are being filmed on camera, and it's helping with traffic flow, right? But in the US, facial recognition is taking on a very different sort of context, and we all are starting to do it with our iPhones, or whatever device you have. But it's still this complex kind of environment where are we willing to accept that technology so that it's more convenient? As you said, not everything is nefarious. You can order a fried chicken by smiling, but sometimes maybe it's a lot of what comes out of Hollywood and other places of Black Mirror and those types of environments is back to, again, consumers, right? If we think about the consumer journey and what she or he is thinking about in the US today, and Alan, I want to ask you this question, is that from Procter & Gamble's standpoint, you have such trusted relationships with consumers and it's evolving, but when these new technologies come forward, facial recognition, how do we communicate that there's not always a nefarious sort of ending to it, that it's the evolution of technology?
With the history of 180 plus years of innovation, bringing products to market, and being a trusted provider of services.
Think
That's any better. There we go.
That's better.
There we go. I'm saying that 180 years of history of being a trusted provider of products. Okay. 180 years of history of being a trusted provider of products and services. And we work on it every day to earn your trust and to earn the trust of the consumers. And whether that has to do with the chemicals that we use, that has to do with the natural fibers and the natural ingredients that go into our products, whether it has to do with the technology that enhances your experience, we work every day and we owe to the consumer our livelihood, and that trust is part of that. So as we continue to digitize, as we continue to use and incorporate more technology into our products, whether it is from any source, we take it very seriously. And sometimes that means we do move a little bit slower, to be honest with you, because we want to make sure that what we're delivering into the market is long-lived, it has value, and it's something that our consumers can be proud of using and we can be proud of providing.
I always joke that I say that we talk about the evolution of technology and we're talking about drones and robots and everything. I'm yet to get through one panel where all the microphones work on time, so I'm glad we got the handheld mic going here to keep it lively. We've got a couple minutes left, and so I want to sort of start to wrap up. I want to talk about, Joanna, you started to mention kind of the aging population, but beyond sort of including the aging population, I think there is a renewed interest in health and wellness in the U.S., globally certainly as well, but particularly here in the U.S. And connected devices can do a lot within the home, outside the home, making our society healthier, right? Whether that's aging population, the younger population. I want to talk about what your thoughts are in this space. And Procter & Gamble certainly has a huge play and huge trust in this area too, of keeping consumers healthy. What are your thoughts on this space?
Sure. I think it is both an evolving but also area, but one that we need to have a deeper understanding for. In the United States, 1 in 4 people actually has some type of disability, whether that's a cognitive disability, whether that it is a physical disability. So when we think about things like the connected home or mobility, that comes front and center for us, is understanding that when we are ever envisioning something, that we are taking into account and ensuring that our design teams are representative of our customer base and their abilities. And sometimes there are folks in our customer base and both on our design teams that don't have complete and abilities. And so much of the work that I think that we do in our design studios and in our Alexa labs is really beginning to evolve the understanding of what our real customer needs are. So when you start to think about that, the importance of inclusive design being at the forefront of everything that we create, whether that is for people with low vision or augmenting somebody's hearing, which as mine is today with the Echo Buds, or even being able to age in place and do things like fall detection, or even being able to connect to your healthcare providers. These are all things that I think are at the forefront, and we continue to evolve the skills that we have and what we have built today to actually introduce those new features over time. And so I think one of the really important things as we're looking at the intersection of AI, hardware, in the IoT space, and our customers is understanding that there are these trajectories. They aren't all the same, and that we have to be able to design for those journeys and to be inclusive of all of those journeys, not just having a point of view of someone who is completely able-bodied, right? But understanding that there are all kinds of things and environmental factors that we need to configure for. And so we're really trying to be at the forefront of developing inclusive technologies and inclusive design teams to address those. And I think we talk a lot about it in the context of our consumer, but it's important that you understand that when you look at your innovation teams, if they aren't reflective of the customers that you're actually attempting to serve, it's very likely that you're going to miss those individual needs. So much of the way that we construct our design teams is really about representation of the customers that we serve, and that's how we see whether that is an aging in place solution or that is really trying to get to the millions and millions of people with disabilities and help augment their lives in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, one more question. I know this has been an amazing conversation. I know we could be here all day, but CES is a long show, and so I want to ask one final question to our esteemed panelists here, which is, other than your own companies, you're at this incredible show of new technologies, and I'm going to start with Alan to my left here. What are you looking forward to seeing at CES?
That's such a tough question. Maybe a company that has a microphone that works at the headset. But I think that there's so much here. I've only had a few minutes to walk around the floor today. I've seen the changes. I've been coming here for 10 plus years. I've seen the changes. So I always look for the unexpected. I look for the technology that's embedded in things that we see that we take advantage for, that we're looking at. And over the years, I've found things in the communication area. I found things in the content area. I found things in the gadget area. So I'm coming here just wide open and trying to see what is the next thing.
Open book. Matthew, over to you.
I think it's going to be mostly meetings for me, Greg.
Oh.
But I think you beat the main CES boss when you've seen the VR toilet right here at P&G Life Lab.
VR toilets. Okay, Linda.
For me, the most important, the fascinating thing that blows my mind, there are no more lines defining what a company is, what a company does. That has been the most outstanding thing, that everybody's playing in everybody else's sandbox, and you're fascinated by it. So that's the biggest change for me this year.
Chris.
I think we talked about this a bit earlier. It's less about looking for the latest individual discrete new device and looking for how companies are coming to the table with integrations or partnerships that are kind of tapping into a new source of value for the consumer, how products could work together, and who's showcasing things that hit along those directions.
Okay, Joanna, other than Amazon, what are we looking forward to seeing?
For us, I think I am really looking forward to seeing customers' reaction to the magic that everyone's attempting to provide for their customer bases. What works, what doesn't work. So for me, it's about really trying to observe the enchantment of the people that are actually utilizing and doing some of the demos on the floor. So I really encourage folks to get their hands dirty with a number of the products and let us know whether or not it's magical. Because if it isn't, then we have a harder job to go back to the drawing table on many of these ideas.
All right, everybody. Well, let's create some magic together this week and this decade ahead. I'd like to give a huge round of applause to Alan and Joanna, Chris, Linda, and Matthew. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the show.